Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to our talk, Harnessing AI for Accessibility and Usability. I'm Robin Knowles from Digital Leaders, and it's my pleasure to be hosting today's talk. Our topic today, government bodies and regulators in particular are under growing pressure to make information more accessible, quite right too, interoperable, and to support growth in the economy. And I hope today we're going to hear how regulators and government organizations are unlocking information to create machine-readable rules, and how now with AI, we can unlock information, workflows, unstructured data, and make more content available in usable formats like code. Our speaker is Alan Blanchard. He's Business Director at TSO. Alan began his career in legal publishing, taking that experience with him to the Financial Conduct Authority, where he overhauled the digital version of the FCA's handbook. And right time, right place, as they say. This coincided with the rise of RegTech, and Alan subsequently worked in a variety of technology firms to deliver on the enormous potential of making compliance easy for everyone with these new technologies, particularly now AI. So, Alan, great to have you with us. My job is to get out of the way. My one bit of housekeeping is to say to people your cameras and microphones are off, and but we do have the chat facility on that bottom menu bar, so do feel free to make comments in the chat. And there is also a Q&A tab in that bottom menu bar, and after Alan has spoken, I'm hoping there's going to be a little bit of time for you to ask him some questions. So I shall get out the way. Alan, looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Robin. Yes, I'm hoping to have all of my presentation completed by about 1:30, so ample time for questions at the end. So I would encourage you to ask anything that springs to mind. I have to say I've really been enjoying AI Week so far. Particularly enjoyed the House of Lords event on Friday, and it's been great to see such a variety of topics on the agenda for these 2 weeks. But today, where our focus is on harnessing AI for accessibility and usability. But before I sort of jump into it, a little bit more about TSO. So TSO, the stationary office, as you may know it, has for a long time been involved in working with legislation, regulations, what would you say, sort of formal information that must be delivered accurately and on time and in the correct format. And previously that involved printing things out and distributing them in a book. These days it involves that too, but now we do much more in the sort of digital space with digital solutions. And we're going to focus today on how we make information accessible, usable, and interoperable. And we're particularly focused on PDFs. So we're all very familiar with PDFs. We're all very familiar with how their information is captured, converted into a PDF and posted usually on a website or sent around on an email or something like this. But this has some problems. So first of all, PDFs are not very accessible. They're very difficult for people to use who need, for example, support in using computers and digital solutions, for example. And to optimize a PDF can be quite difficult and time consuming, which is why not every PDF is optimized for accessibility. And then when you're looking at using a PDF, they're very difficult to sort of copy and paste information out of to share particular parts of certainly when you're talking about PDFs that run to thousands of pages, they are extremely difficult to use. And when you run a search and you discover a PDF, you're not of any certainty as to whether that PDF is in force or is old. You know, what's the sort of history behind that PDF. It's very difficult to understand that. And then on the interoperability side, here we're talking about once you've sort of locked that PDF, that information away in a PDF, how do you use it in another source? How do you share it with a different source? How does another program go and get that information and use it in a different context? That's virtually impossible with a PDF as well. So they're kind of the practical reasons for why we want to sort of attempt to improve accessibility and usability. And on the accessibility side of things, there are legal requirements as to why we have to do it. So accessibility is mandated in law that information has to be accessible, and we have the sort of global guidelines, the WCAG guidelines there. We have a lot of legislation here in the UK and around the world as well. So across Europe, Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, they all have their own different ways of describing why this information has to be accessible. So, we have to do it. And public sector bodies are certainly under a greater obligation to do this. So how are we doing this? Well, at TSO, we have a tool which we call Remediad, and it is a way of taking non-accessible PDFs, and we give them into the Remediad machine, and this is where the AI plays a role. So what the AI is doing is it's understanding the information that's in that PDF, and it is able then to tag elements of that PDF to a consistent standard. And it is a machine learning piece of AI, let's say, and it learns the different types of content, where they sit in a hierarchy, and how they should be tagged and how they should be displayed. But we don't stop there. We make sure that then, certainly with the Remediad concept, we then hand that over to a human, and the human will do a QA assessment of the tagging that's happened, and we will assess that, we will make the edits and the exceptions, and we will feed that learning back into the algorithm that made the tagging in the first place. So that's how the machine is learning. It's not using sort of open source or open web kind of information to do that. It is doing it based on the inputs that it's given and the tagging that it applies. And then out of that, you get fairly quickly an accessible PDF that is compliant to WCAG standards. So we make sure that we have the bulk of the work being done by AI, the quality assurance being done by a human, and then the output is done to the standards that are relevant to that particular document, which is generally usually WCAG, but it can be other things if necessary. So let's have a look and see how. This is not a live demo or anything. It's just a few screen grabs that I can talk you through. So here we have a PDF. It's a modern slavery statement, and then there are no tags on that at the moment. So if I'm needing to understand this document with a screen reader, for example, the screen reader will read everything in that document very literally. It won't understand what's a heading, what's body text, what's a sublist, what's a sub-item, what's a link, what's a reference. It won't be able to cope with that very well. So it's very, very difficult for me as using accessibility software to understand this document. So this is the problem we're trying to fix. So what we do is we tag it using the Remediad software. So what it's done is it's gone in, understood here in this example that we have a heading and a piece of body text, and it applies tagging within the context of the PDF to that piece of content. And in all PDFs, you have an accessibility feature where you can see the tagging within the PDF. And this is what the screen reader uses. It uses this sort of menu. So you can hide all of this tagging for anyone not using a screen reader, but for those using a screen reader, it uses the tagging to help it understand. So it will read the headings in order, it will read the paragraphs in order, it will understand where the list components are, and the screen reader will go through. And we've tagged that fairly quickly, let's say. And what we also do is we produce a report. So you get a report of the content of the document, what it was composed of, what changes were made to it, or what tags were applied to it. And then within the accessibility tags within the PDF, you can see that structure as well. So PDFs work with accessibility tags very well. The issue is in being able to apply them in the first place. So instead of having a manual process of going through and applying every tag one at a time, we've used the AI tooling to help us cut through most of that work in one go, and we can check the output and we can ensure that the tags are applied correctly with a human to ensure we've got what we need. So that's Remediad. That's tagging PDFs with accessibility tags to make sure that that PDF is accessible. You can then post that version on your website, and you can tick that job off your list. And you can do this at scale. So you can take many PDFs and run them through the system and produce compliant PDFs very quickly and at scale. So in terms of usability, I've got a different example for you here. So when it comes to usability, what do we mean by this? So I think locking and unlocking is a very good sort of term to use, because if you think of the PDFs as sort of paper under glass is also another sort of analogy I've read recently. This is effectively what they are. They're no more useful or usable than a piece of paper. So once we unlock them, we can produce a different output. So it's no longer paper under glass, it is code, it's accessible, it's machine readable, and we can understand within the context of that document what the content is, what it's being used for, what it's describing, identify it, and then extract it and use it for other purposes, or whatever piece of information we need. We have access to that. We get more accurate search results, and we get a better understanding of what's in that document and whether it's relevant to me. So how is the AI going to help in this? So the AI, in a similar way to the way that we applied the tagging with the Remediad tool there, AI can understand the content that's in that PDF, extract it and structure it. So apply data tagging to it and understand the sort of context of that content and where it sits, and what data endpoints need to be applied to that content, let's say. And then once it's sort of structured data, it then becomes more machine readable, and actually AI can then add another layer of sort of usability on top of that in terms of the search experience, and the way that that information can be shared across other different searches. So you can have a single search searching across many different documents, understanding which parts of that document are relevant to that search, for example. And also we get better safeguards. So what we're going to have when we've structured the data versus a flat PDF is the AI is going to have a better understanding of what that document is, and it will have less what we call undesirable outcomes. It won't hallucinate. It will give you the answer that you're looking for, which is ultimately what you want the AI to do. So it makes sense. So we've got a little case study here of how we did this. So the Bank of Mauritius has an innovation hub called Innovate, and they put out a call last year for companies to help them with solving particular challenges. And one of the challenges the Bank of Mauritius has, as do all regulators and all kind of institutions that generate this information, is that when they generate this information, it's often hard to find, hard to access, as we've discussed. And what they asked TSO to do was to produce a proof of concept to show that a PDF can be converted into structured data and semantically enriched, and then what we can do with that data as an output as well. So we wanted to show that you could take a PDF and you could produce HTML, XML, JSON, and you can take it back to a PDF as well if you want to, and have that done in a much more kind of hands-on way, a much more sort of content first, digital first process, rather than working outside of a system in Word, converting to a PDF and putting on a website. We have the data front and center within a content management system, editorial or updates and new information added to that in the context of the content management system, and then those can be produced out into whatever format you want in fairly real time. So this was the challenge that we were set, and we were very happy to kind of help do this. So we took a 43-page PDF document, the guideline on cyber and technology risk management, a very fairly standard piece of guidance that any kind of central bank or any regulator is likely to have within their domain, and at the moment is only available as a PDF on their website. So what we did is we took that PDF, and very much in the same sort of similar fashion as the Remediad process, we were able to ingest that PDF into our content management system, let's say. But really what we did is we converted it into JSON. So instead of marking it up with accessibility tags, we've converted it into a JSON format. So it is now structured data. So it's the same content components, but they've been identified and labeled in a JSON format. Then what you can do is you can then use that JSON to produce other things. So you can ingest it into a content management system. And here we've got a sort of screen grab of what it looks like as HTML. So it's actually sitting in a web browser, in a content management system, but I, as an editor or a policy maker, can have access to that content very easily, get the bit I need, and make changes to it and take it through the process. So here we see inside the sort of editorial side of the system, let's say, so you can have access to the content and you can edit things, you can change things, but you've now moved the start point for making these changes right to the very beginning of the process, being working in the content in the right context. And you can add other tooling available to this as well. So you can add in audit controls, you can add in version controls, you can have tagging of cross-references, let's say cross-references applied. You can manage your glossary references. All of this is now done with much less friction than we had in the old way of working. And then what we can produce is anything, really, from that sort of JSON version within the content management system. We can put it onto a website as HTML. You can then generate a PDF of that content back again if you want to, because PDF is still a format that people want to obtain large bodies of information in, but they want to have access to that format for that particular use case, not the sort of that's it, take it or leave it, it's a PDF. It's I need a PDF for this particular task, but otherwise I need a HTML for searching, etc. And we're also able to manage the process with the workflow management within the system. So we make sure that the changes are being made to a particular paragraph, let's say, for a particular project, for a particular policy reason. It's signed off, and then it's published at the appropriate time with all the other information that would go with a policy change within a central bank, let's say. So that was the sort of case study that we had there. And then you can sort of extrapolate from that all the other different types of content that benefit from this unlocking process. So obviously we've got primary legislation. Regulation is very apt for this because it's changed more frequently than legislation tends to be. And we have a lot more, let's say, non-expert users of that content. So people who don't have access to a lawyer to help them understand that information, here you're able to build a solution that gives them not just access to the regulation, but also the guidance and any other codes of practice. You can start bonding all of these different information sources together to say, right, here's your question. Your answer depends on what the regulation says, what the guidance says, what a code of practice says, and you can bring that all together when you're sort of communicating that answer to the person who's made the query, and they get a much better understanding of what's going on. Because at the moment it's a sort of trawl this PDF, trawl that PDF, trawl that PDF. So we want to remove that, and we want to make sure that the complexity of this information isn't simplified. It's that we understand the complexity, and we have the structured data that sits behind that to understand that a query requires results from source A, source B, source C. That's the main objective. Okay, and then sort of final part of this is the interoperability piece. So so once we've unlocked these PDFs and we've got AI available to us, what else have we got in terms of the interoperability? So here I want to talk about a tool that we have called DocuLens. And what DocuLens is doing is it is a piece of AI tooling. Again, it's using machine learning, among other things, and natural language processing to help understand what a document is talking about, or what is inside a document, that when you're sharing that document with another organization. So I think the best example of this would be where you need to send you're in an organization that needs to report to a regulator on your particular policies, like anti-money laundering policy or something like this, and you send that over. At the moment, that's a manual process for a supervisor to go in, read that document, and understand what it is. So what we want to do is have DocuLens read that, do the process of reading that document, understand what it means, and produce the summary of what that document is, and ideally assess the sort of score the level of compliance within that document against what the rules themselves say. So then you now have a much more greater interoperability between the regulated organization and the regulator themselves. Then we can start plugging together and understanding what the regulation is asking for, what the regulated organization has sent in, and what the gaps are. So that's what DocuLens is doing. Now, all of these tools are underpinned by the UK government AI playbook, so they have to be done ethically. And we do this by not having, well, by using only closed environments. We don't use information that's outside of the remit of the tooling, for example. We have checks and balances, certainly with humans in the loop, let's say. And it's always used securely as well. So we make sure that no data is leaked out from the tooling to any other kind of AI interface, let's say. And that everything that we do is transparent and auditable. So I think that's very important. There's no black box magic solution here. You've seen that these tools are operating on very specific objectives, which is usually the removal of manual, I want to say kind of high volume workloads where it takes a human a long time to go through these documents. We want the AI to do that very accurately in a way that saves the person having to do it the time to do that that job, if you like. So that's the sort of guardrails that we wrap around this. Okay, so kind of in summary then, I think, so I promised to finish by past. Looks like I'm going to achieve that. That's good. So so we want the AI that we are using to automate accessibility, and we can do that with a fairly high level of automation. I think certainly a level that we're happy enough to say that we're supporting around 40 to 50% savings in terms of cost and time than manual tagging. And I think when you're working at scale, that's a significant reason to do it. And then we want to convert complex information into structured data. I think the sort of long-term goal for that is quite far-reaching. If we can have all regulatory, it's quite a task to set ourselves, but if we can have all regulatory data transformed into structured data, all regulatory content as structured data, then we can start deploying AI tools at scale to really understand and get very accurate and good answers to complex questions that any kind of ordinary citizen, let's say, not sort of, I'm thinking a non-lawyer here, can then get a very reliable answer back from whatever question they've asked. And then on the interoperability side, we're talking about extracting information to enable governance. So we want, as a regulator, we want the people that we regulate to be compliant. The people that are working in a regulated environment want to be compliant. And at the moment, there's quite a friction between how the organization communicates with, relates to the regulator. So the AI tooling here can be used to remove some of that friction and make it easier to understand what a compliant policy document, for example, looks like. And then when we send that back, how the supervisor within that regulator understands how compliant that document is. And then obviously we then can concentrate on the best practices that are operating within those organizations rather than the paperwork and the box ticking exercises that may be the sort of source focus of attention at the moment. So I think that's my last slide. It is. So I've been through all of that very quickly. So there's some sort of contact details there for you to reach out if you want to go through any of that in a lot more detail than I've done now, but very happy to take a few questions if Robin's still there.
Alan, thanks so much. That's great. That's been very useful. I'm sure we'll have some questions for you. Just give people a chance to start adding those, but I'll start with the ones we've got. So the first one, is from Teresa, who's from a family rights group. I think that's probably worth saying just to make it relevant for the question. Is the plan for the ability to ask questions where the answers include legislation, code of practice, guidelines, etc.? Is the plan for that to be publicly available?
Yes, I think that would be the plan, to have that publicly available. So there would be, so we're working with Department for Business and Trade on this at the moment, and they can see, their vision is to sort of have a central point where a person, a citizen, an organization goes and can ask their question and receive their answer. So yeah, sort of .gov style experience, but a much sort of more sophisticated search and query tooling around that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Question from Jason here, straight into the detail. So he's put in two questions. The second one is asking how much it costs, but let's start with the first one, which is why use this AI tool instead of Adobe Acrobat's tools? So he's saying his council's having a think about which direction they want to go. So that's a kind of, I guess, a sort of product versus product question, but you probably have a view on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. There's no reason on earth why you wouldn't choose an off-the-shelf Adobe, the sort of inbuilt Adobe tooling if you want to. There's no reason for that, but why you wouldn't do that. But the scope of that tool might be limiting. So you would have to take a view as to say, how complicated is my content that I want to tag? and how likely is it that Adobe is going to be successful at doing that to a percentage score that I'm happy with, versus, oh no, I've got some really complicated content sets here that I don't think Adobe is going to do a very good job with. Therefore, I need to go and talk to whoever it is to see if their tool will understand that, is trained on that content to understand it better and allow a much better rate, a score rate, if you like, of success when it spits out that document and it's tagged up. Is the Q&A process really, a 5-minute job, or is it a 50-minute job? And, how helpful is the AI being? So I think you have to assess that in the context of the content that you've got to onboard and put through this process.
Okay. Next question. Early on, there were concerns about getting the wrong answers when searching regulations through generative AIs. How will this help an agentic AI or a chatbot get the right answer?
Yeah. I would still say there's massive concerns about getting the right answer when you're using a chat GPT to ask the question. Definitely, that doesn't sort of take you much further forward. When we're structuring the data for clients like Bank of Mauritius, here we are concentrating purely on their content, and we are effectively creating a small language model. And that is all that sort of sophisticated search and navigation will be working with. So the opportunity for it to hallucinate and bring in AI is always eager to please and always keen to find the right answer, so it will hallucinate to do that. But with a small language model, you can control it and say, if you can't find this answer, you have to say you can't find this answer. But obviously, it will try and find it, and it will use and structuring the data will enable us to have a high degree of success. But it must always be able to say, I can't find the answer to that. It might be the wrong question, the wrong resource, could be many reasons why it's not finding the right answer. But the sort of crux of it is in having that content, feeding a small language model, and having the AI run very closely against what that content is and isn't.
And I remember the Foreign Office sort of decided that it would have sort of FAQs where the AI looking responses were kind of pre-approved because they're very worried, obviously, about the AI giving out the wrong answer. So if you've got a small model based on your set of regulations, is the accuracy level going up because of these types of technology? In other words, their ability to understand the PDFs and the documentation in the background. So is that taking a step forward?
Yeah, obviously, I would say yes. But I don't think it's about accuracy. It's about understanding the complexity of what's in play for your particular query and what the answer needs to entail. Traditionally, if you ask a lawyer this question, the lawyer is always going to say it depends, and they will give you the rationale for why it's not a straightforward answer. Here, what we're saying is it can still not be a straightforward answer, but the AI is now able to cope with that complexity, and not just like with your traditional Google search, stop at the first document it finds and say, there you go. Not very helpful. It's able to sort of compose the answer based on a variety of different sources. And because we've tagged it very accurately and structured that data very accurately, it can come back with a high degree of confidence and say, look, the answer is not straightforward, but you need to be looking at this resource, and this is the sort of research that you need to be doing, unless it is a very straightforward answer type of thing. So I think it's not necessarily about accuracy, it's about coping with the complexity and not leaving any of those sort of potential answers behind, if you like.
Yeah. So Sarah's got a question here about, is this AI making the content easier for the public to read and understand? And your first tool clearly does, if you're using technology to read documents. So you covered a number of tools here, but that first one was about making PDFs accessible.
Yes, just on the purest notion of accessibility. Yeah, you make those documents more accessible, and then the sort of next level deeper is to take that accessibility tagging and apply it as tagging as if it was code, and then that makes it machine readable. Now the human user isn't going to be interested in the machine readable version of it, but we can use that machine readable version to support the output that we give to the user asking the query, and we're able to be more accurate and cope with more complexity, as I've said, in terms of the answers that we give back in terms of that, for the purposes of those questions that are asked.
Yeah. Jason's asking about cost and time because he's sort of interested in building a business case to buy a system like this. So maybe in the context of the Bank of Mauritius, how how many documents do they have? How long does this take? I mean, obviously with AI and things like that, you kind of hope it takes seconds, not days. I imagine it's how quickly can you feed things into a machine or something like that that limits you. But do you maybe just take us through that sort of Bank of Mauritius example?
Yeah, that's a good example actually, because the Bank of Mauritius put that call out, having the backing of the Cambridge Subtech Lab and the World Economic Forum as sort of supporting organisations to bring together the private companies who can do these sorts of things with the regulators, central banks who have these problems, right? So it's a curated collaboration, and that was done free of charge. And that was made very clear to all parties, and this is the role that sort of Cambridge Subtech Lab have in that. But that meant that the scope is quite well defined. So we only took one document and we ran it through the process. So we spent about a month understanding the requirements and the scope of what we were going to do. Then we at TSO spent about a month building the system, or rather configuring it for the particular requirements of that document that we were converting. And then we spent about another month writing up the sort of conclusions, the outcomes, sharing the outputs with the Bank of Mauritius there, and understanding what it is we'd done and what the potential next steps were. So end to end on a project like that was about 3 months. And as I say, we did that as a sort of secondment initiative to help the Bank of Mauritius understand what the art of the possible looked like, with the support of Cambridge Subtech Lab and World Economic Forum, collaborating, around these particular problems and use cases. So you can extrapolate that out to bigger problems if you want to, or you can keep the scope quite tight, and you can have that sort of proof of concept turned around quite quickly.
So, good question here. So your particular area of expertise and knowledge is around regulation and codes of practice and guidance as being sort of the content that you can turn into structured data, but there must be lots of other bits of the public sector and government that would benefit from structured data. Are you kind of sort of, without giving away your business secrets, Alan, well, who's going to be getting a call from you next to be told they have a huge repository of opportunity?
No, that's a very good question. So no, we are really, our focus at TSO is really, I'm afraid, just on the regulation, that sort of technical information that has a particular status within the sort of legal hierarchy, if you like. I think that's where we come into the interoperability point, because you can then start. I think regulatory reporting is probably a good example of this, where you've got financial services firms have to. My background at the FCA, you have to report your numbers back to the regulator, and the regulator asks for those numbers in a rule, in a guidance, in a particular piece of legislation, or not legislation, regulation. And then the firm understands what that's asking for and then reports back those numbers. Now, to digitize the FCA handbook meant that you could make those changes, and the firm really should be able to understand what they're asking for without having to go and read them necessarily. They could take a feed of those rules and then plug them into whatever system they're using to extract their data out from their own sort of numbers, if you like. So the benefit of being able to digitize rules and regulations is that you can feed that data into other data sets, information sources, programs, applications that need to understand the rules that they need to report back on, if you like. So if we're asking for number of mortgages for houses under 200,000, you can put that in a rule. You can turn that into a requirement within the database and get that number out and send it back to the regulator. If the regulator decides to uplift that number to 250, sake of argument, you can change that rule, feed that through as data, as a sort of as a structured data point and then the firm can take that, put that straight into their system, and get back the correct data back out to the regulator. That's a very kind of rough example of doing it, but the point is that we concentrate at TSO, we concentrate on the rules as data, rules as code, machine readable rules, so that you can support the interoperability with other processes, systems, and applications that need to be involved in other aspects, which is usually data components in different here is money for the FCA's sake of argument, but it can be property, it can be anything, so we stay kind of that side of things, if you like.
Yeah. So you said early on that it was sort of one of your benefits from the kind of project fairly early slide that it enables regulators to see the impact of changes before they're made. And if I can say thank you for that question, but just broadening that out on behalf of the asker, if I may, how does that, what do you see AI and this process doing in terms of the way the regulations are made in the first place? Are there kind of going to be positive unintended benefits to the regulators? So they're creating, at the moment they're creating regulations in the form of the PDF, and you're taking that PDF and doing great things with it. But is there a kind of a loop, a virtuous circle here, whereby sort of the whole way in which regulation is built will eventually change, or is already starting to change, perhaps?
Yes, I think so. Let me go back a slide or two. Let's go to this one. So yes, there is a benefit, and it's very much an intended benefit. At the moment, so my experience at the FCA of working with the drafters there was that you had many, many different policy people instructing the drafters to change things in the handbook, all happening at the same time, and all interested in their own policy making and getting the outcomes that they need. All very complicated when you're working on a sort of single data source. And very often you would find that a drafter was working on one particular policy and it was in conflict with another accidentally. But you may not discover that until you've sort of produced the rules, and then you've caused chaos and confusion with firms in terms of saying two contradictory things. What we can do here is we can have an understanding of what a particular impact is going to be way upstream of the process. So you can start drafting changes or new policies, and then you can, with the tagging that you apply, depending on the taxonomy that you use, the ontology that you've got there, you can understand what other parts of the handbook or rule book or guidance, whatever it is, what part are going to be impacted by the change that you've got, because they contain the same properties as the section that you're working on, as an example. And you're also able to manage who's working on a particular piece of content and what are they doing on that piece of content. So if I say, show me all of the paragraphs in the book that are the same as the one I'm working on, it will give you those. The AI will be able to bring those back to you, and it will be able to flag that, your colleague over here is working on this one, and this one at the same time. So all of these potential pitfalls that are at the moment downstream can all be brought upstream. And then the policy making conversation isn't just about what changes need to be pushed through the rule book to give effect to this policy. It's about what's the potential impact on these other policy areas, because for whatever reason we've structured our rules in a way that means that we've got to cut across several different policy heads in order to be able to give effect to this policy. So I would like to see that as much more of a sort of application, a tool to be able to say, right, almost like a digital twin, if you like. You can create a digital twin of the rules and say, I'm going to make this change as if it was real, and then you show me the impact of what happens to that. And now you get much more data-led policy making and understanding the impact of, or potential impact. Was it an intended consequence, or was it unintended? Whereas at the moment, you've really got to make that change for live, for real, put it out, and then understand from firm feedback what the consequences are. So that was a long-winded answer.
No. So, well, no, I think it's probably what they're hoping you're going to explain, really, was sort of how this is helping upstream. So I've got one last question, because we really must bring things to a close. So it may be a long answer or a very short answer, but what's next for AI in this context? And sort of new AIs are coming out weekly. So that's probably quite a difficult question, isn't it? Because you don't know what might exist in a month's time. But what's your kind of view from where you are?
No, you don't know what's going to potentially round the corner. That's true. But I think the one fundamental truth that's underlying all of our experiences with AI at the moment is the data. And I think the next step is a realization that the data is at the heart of it. And I'm not just talking about what we do, it's all data across everywhere. And there will need to be a concerted effort to improve the way that data is served up to these AI tools. And obviously, I've demonstrated a few of the ways in which we can do that. There are many more ways in which you can do that. But once we've done that, then it's a virtuous circle of better data, better AI tool, leads to more better data, better AI tools, right? So we want to get on that virtuous circle, whereas at the moment we seem to be tripping over poor data quality at the moment.
Okay, well, that's both a negative and a positive, but it feels like a very positive place to finish our conversation today. That yeah, if we can sort out our data, then we'll get ourselves into a positive upward spiral. So, Alan, thank you so much. You know, I mean, it's you know, regulation, codes of practice, guidance. You know, it's a really specialist area, and it's great that TSA are able to bring AI into this space, and I'm sure we'll all start seeing it in our day-to-day lives when we query government and regulators on what we can and can't do. We'll start to get really much more understandable answers back. So thank you so much. As always, thank you, Alan.
Pleasure.